on an all-new Dr. Phil. A baby ripped from her mother's arms.
A CPS worker and 5 police officers came to my home, searched my entire house. I literally thought, do you have the right family?
A father convicted of child abuse.
He admits some trauma did happen to the baby.
She had bruising on her head and ear.
Did you wonder if he did something?
Was this an accident?
You had the baby on your knee.
I had to catch her by her face to prevent her from hitting a coffee table.
Or was it deliberate?
Maybe the baby was being difficult and you snapped.
I'm a trained airline pilot. I don't just snap. I've never abused my daughter.
Then why are you in jail? Let's do it.
Have a good show, everybody. Here we go.
This is a safe place to talk about hard things. Stand by, Dr. Phil. I try to be an emotional compass and point you in the right direction. 5, 4. I am not giving up on you. Go, Dr. Phil. Brenda and Josh were so excited to become parents. They had been married for 7 years, both successful in their careers. Brenda as a nurse and Josh as a commercial airline pilot. They felt they were ready to start a family, and so when they found out Brenda was pregnant, they were ecstatic. And as they began to prepare for the baby's arrival, they took parenting courses. They read every book out there. Then in January of 2014, Brenda and Josh brought home their little bundle of joy, their daughter, Naomi. They had no clue they would be charged with child abuse. That's right, child abuse. Baby Naomi was taken away from her parents and put into foster care. One night, CPS even arrived unannounced with police at their door when the grandparents were with the baby. Brenda went into hiding, and Josh is now in jail. Later, we're going to hear from the father via satellite from jail.
A local toddler at the center of a wild child abuse case is now among Michigan's most wanted kids. The local man convicted of abusing his baby daughter is maintaining his innocence tonight, even as he's being sent to jail.
A local mom who went into hiding from CPS will have to tell the court where she's living with her baby.
Josh says the baby slipped off his knee one day. In the tumble, mom and dad says she suffered only a faint bruise on her cheek. But a doctor later found more, something called a subdural hematoma. That doctor then accused Josh and Brenda of abuse.
Did you abuse your daughter?
Never. I would never hurt my daughter.
CPS and a doctor feel differently. They say whatever happened when Josh was alone with the baby, it was enough to charge him with abuse. Brenda says she will never forget that day. It was March 15th, 2014.
The morning of the accident was a normal morning for us. Josh wanted to take care of Naomi, and I had a hair appointment, so he stayed home with Naomi. I called Josh right before my hair appointment began, and we talked about Naomi. She was still napping. Everything seemed normal. It was peaceful there at the house. I called Josh from the salon while I was paying and drove home, which was about a 10-minute drive. Just pulled into the driveway and walked into the back door. Josh was holding Naomi in his arms, and he had a concerned look on his face. He said, "You're not going to believe what happened." When you called me from the salon, I had been burping Naomi, and as I was hanging up, she began to fall forward off of my knee toward the coffee table. When Naomi was falling forward, he caught her by her face and head and then scratched her face. And not for a minute did I think that there was something more to the story.
But is there more to the story? Accidents happen all the time, right? Who hasn't experienced some type of fall with their child? And currently, Naomi seems fine. Josh and Brenda say the only real damage done was to their reputation as parents, turning an accident into the worst nightmare of their lives.
Naomi, after the accident, was perfectly fine for about a day, and then we began to see some changes. She was lethargic, vomiting. She would become ill and then get better. We went to the ER twice before she was actually hospitalized. We were told that it was likely a virus, and that she'd be fine, but something was telling me that it wasn't okay. Naomi went unresponsive, and she was totally limp, totally pale. Her breathing was deep and slow, and it seemed like she was dying. The ambulance came and whisked her away. My husband and I were both in tears, holding each other. The situation is bad, but it could have been a lot worse if she had died. And she was pretty close to it. Josh called me and said, the doctors want to talk to us. And I remember thinking, they're going to tell us what's going on with Naomi. I said, do you have information for us? And one of the residents said that they had found retinal hemorrhages, and this led them to suspect child abuse of Naomi. I had this feeling of anger, fear, shock. Kind of one of those drop to your knees moments. You're telling me that you think we abused her? Josh describes it as though a hand grenade were dropped in the room. I remember seeing his mouth literally drop open and a look of horror come on his face. As a nurse, I knew that when someone accuses you of something like this is a big deal.
Okay, Brenda, you're here alone. Josh is not here with you because he's in jail.
That's correct. It's a very difficult situation.
But you weren't there when this happened.
That's correct.
When something did happen. I mean, he admits some trauma did happen to the baby, right?
Right.
In your most skeptical moment, did you question his intention? Did you wonder if he did something?
I think any logical, normal person would have to ask that question, and I did ask him tough questions in the privacy of our home.
What responses did you get?
He had not abused our child.
They wound up taking your baby away from you for 7 months, and you were investigated top, side, and bottom. I mean, and you're completely exonerated, right? That's correct. But yet you're still listed on the registry as a child abuser, even though you're completely exonerated.
They tried to terminate my parental rights permanently and then adopt Naomi to another family.
Even though they have no findings against you whatsoever.
That's right.
After this happens, baby's fine, but then the baby does start to show some signs, starts to show some signs of being sick.
Yes.
So you go to the hospital. And it was 10 days into the hospitalization that someone raises the issue of abuse.
I literally thought, are you in the right room? Do you have the right family?
But how did they get it so wrong if it's wrong? Because they said that the baby had brain damage, brain bleeds, that there were hemorrhages, retinal hemorrhages, that according to them, consistent with shaken baby syndrome.
Right. And I think the key word is consistent with, but there are other explanations which were ignored.
Well, Brenda says it was a pre-existing birth injury that caused the subdural hematoma, which are the brain bleeds, not the accident.
Naomi had a traumatic birth. Naomi wasn't progressing down the birth canal. I was frightened. I was exhausted. The doctor that was attending the labor, she said, I think we need to consider doing vacuum assist with your delivery. And I didn't want to do that, and I knew bleeding could potentially be an issue. When I agreed, they applied the vacuum to Naomi's head, and I could feel the tension, the pulling. It felt as though Naomi were moving forward and then slipping back. The doctors used the vacuum about 4 times, and at one point the suction actually popped off of Naomi's head. As a result of the suction used during delivery, she had bruising on her head and ear. It was terrifying. That's not what a mother wants for their newborn baby.
Well, when we come back, we're going to hear from the father at the center of this controversy. Josh was convicted of second-degree child abuse, but he says he is not guilty. He's going to tell us why when we come back.
Tomorrow on an all-new Dr. Phil.
You got arrested.
I'm beating myself up over this.
Beverly Hills housewife Kim Richards.
I poured a drink of vodka, and I thought, oh my God, what have I done?
Are you living a lie, telling everybody, well, I've been sober for 3 years?
The exclusive interview.
You are drunk in a bar fighting with a cop. That is not good mothering.
Is this an intervention? I'm sorry, I can't.
Then on Wednesday, a professor has some explaining to do.
He introduced me as his fiance.
She thought we were engaged.
Did you give Tanya the ring you bought for Julie?
Yes.
Are you kidding me?
That's Wednesday.
It is truly unbelievable that Josh was convicted of child abuse. The prosecutor said is, I don't have to prove how this happened to Naomi. I'm just having to prove that Naomi was fine before she was left alone with Josh. And then this is the result. It would show the pictures of her in the hospital. And he was sentenced just a few weeks ago. In the blink of an eye, they ripped a child from her mother and her father.
Now, Josh admits his 11-week-old daughter accidentally fell from his lap. But then they were accused of child abuse. Josh went to trial. He was convicted. Take a look.
I met my husband about 10 years ago at work. Josh is funny, passionate about life. He's a very loyal husband. Family is everything to him. Josh has been a commercial airline pilot for over 7 years. He is an amazing pilot. Naomi is our only child. We wanted to be the best parents that we could be. So my husband, on his own, signed up for Daddy Boot Camp at the hospital, and I was very proud of him for that. You know, Josh is my best friend. We've gone through so much together.
Do you like the turtle?
People have stepped in and they've broken that apart. People want to make Josh into something that he is not. Josh is a loving husband and father, and they're damaging not just me, they're damaging our daughter.
Well, Josh is joining us now via satellite from jail. Now, at this point, what I want to hear from you is how you think you went from being a proud, excited graduate of Daddy Boot Camp to sitting there in an orange jumpsuit convicted of child abuse.
Well, Dr. Phil, it's been a nightmare. All I can tell you is I love my wife and daughter, and I did not do this. In these cases, unfortunately, with child abuse, you're guilty until proven innocent. There were key things in this trial that the jury weren't allowed to see. I passed 2 polygraph tests. There were several medical journal peer-reviewed articles that we tried to introduce into evidence that weren't allowed. There's new science out there that is debunking shaken baby syndrome.
Let me take apart some of the things that you've just said so people understand. You say you took 2 polygraph tests. Let me go over those. In test 1, you were asked, were your statements on March 16th at the hospital accurate? And your answer was yes. Then you were asked, are your comments as noted in the hospital report on March 16th truthful? And your answer was yes. Then you were asked, when you told the doctors at the hospital about the incident on March 15th, were you truthful? And your answer was yes. The result of that polygraph is that you were being truthful, that nothing that you had said was deceptive. What was it that you told the people at the hospital took place?
I was burping Naomi on my knee after feeding her a bottle, and my wife had called me on her cell phone. So I picked up the phone and talked to her, and when I hung up the phone to put it back on the coffee table, I felt Naomi falling forward off of my knee. So I reached forward to catch her, and I had to catch her by her face to prevent her from hitting a coffee table in front of us.
All right, test 2. Since Naomi's birth, have there been injuries to her that have not been reported? Your answer was no. Since her birth, has Naomi experienced physical trauma that has not been reported? Answer, no. Other than the March 15th event, are you aware of any other injuries to Naomi? Answer, no. And the results of both tests did not indicate deception. So you were being honest in that. And those are not admissible in court, so those were not part of the court record, and that's what you're saying, they didn't get to hear that.
Correct.
Okay. All right, fine. Go on.
Also, Dr. Phil, we had 6 expert doctors that weighed in on our case, and none of them thought that this was abuse.
But you're home with her alone. You're a new dad. You had just come home from a trip on a new airplane. Maybe the baby was being difficult, and you snapped. Everybody has a breaking point. Was that yours?
No, Dr. Phil. I was well rested. I'm a trained airline pilot. I don't just snap.
Then why are you in jail?
That's a good question. I love my daughter. She was a wanted child. We planned for her and brought her into this world, and I have never abused my daughter.
We reached out to the prosecuting attorney who said, quote, I want to take this opportunity to dispel any suggestion that we were inappropriately aggressive in pursuing this case. We handled this case as we do any other case of a similar nature, with careful consideration of the facts. To read the full statement, please go to drphil.com. All right, we have to take a break. Coming up, Brenda says for her protection, she installed a nanny cam in her home. It was turned on one night when CPS came to her house unexpectedly. She says she could not believe what happened. We're going to see that footage after the break. Well, today's story leaves us questioning what really happened with 11-week-old baby Naomi. Was there child abuse? Was it an accident? Brenda says CPS has been out to get her family and even has proof. Her nanny cam caught it all on tape. Now, before we look at this, put this in context for me. When in the process did this happen?
This event occurred on the day that Josh was convicted.
He has been convicted but not sentenced.
That's correct. He's staying with friends.
He is still restricted from being anywhere around the baby.
That's correct, and we always had followed that rule.
Okay, but you've been cleared at this point. The baby has been returned to you.
Right.
So you can be around the baby, but he cannot.
Right.
And you're respecting that.
100%.
So you've left the home to go see Josh on the day he's been convicted, and the baby is in your home being supervised by his parents.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And here's what happened. Take a look.
The night of the conviction, I had gone to be with Josh where he was staying, and my in-laws were at my house. I had installed the surveillance cameras. The cameras were for my peace of mind and for my protection. We learned a CPS worker and 5 police officers came to my home, searched my entire house, looked in closets, opened every door, kind of interrogated my in-laws, asked what kind of car I drive, where I was, where my husband was. We learned that this is all taking place, and I remember thinking, am I in America? Why do they get to know where I am, what kind of car that I drive? But I'm thinking, I'm exonerated. I'm completely cleared of this.
We reached out to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, who said, quote, it's not uncommon for our staff to ask law enforcement to accompany them on home visits when safety concerns are present. To read the full statement, please go to drphil.com. Okay, Brenda's attorney, Elizabeth Warner, is joining us, and I'm shocked at that tape. I have to tell you, they show up at your house unannounced with 5 cops, uniformed cops, knock on your door and come in?
With no court order. That's the important part.
No court order, no search warrant, no how
There was actually 2 hiding in the backyard that came running around the front. I mean, like a sting operation.
There was also a discussion outside the home as to whether or not there was a court order to enter. That's obviously important under our Constitution. A home can't be invaded without that.
I want to add somebody to this conversation. This is Dr. Charles Sophie, and Dr. Sophie is the medical director of the Department of Child and Family Services here in Los Angeles County, which is the largest Department of Child and Family Services in the United States. You just watched what happened here. What is your reaction to that?
Actually, I'm embarrassed for the CPS department because they needed to have a court order. You can't just knock on someone's door and invade them like that.
They showed up with 5 uniformed police officers, and they all came in the house. They're asking about luggage and cars and filtering through the house. What is up with that?
Well, I mean, it's bordering bullying. I mean, they're in their face. They're telling them with that behavior, we don't trust you, we don't trust anything about you, we don't even know what kind of car you drive, we're going to test this lady, see if she knows the same story that that one knows. I mean, what's all the suspicion about?
Mrs. Burns was cleared three months before that by another jury. She actually had a jury trial and won it. So she was cleared, and when we see a situation like this, and it happens a lot in this country, that CPS takes police with them in a situation where no violence could be contemplated because it bullies the people into allowing them to be admitted into the house. It scares people into allowing them entry.
Okay.
That, by the way, was the investigative agency for Mr. Burns's criminal case that went and invaded the home.
I hold our Child Protective Services doctor responsible for this false diagnosis. I just think that we have the case of a doctor who made an accusation, and CPS is taking the word of the doctor over the family. In the mind of the Child Protective Services doctor that we worked with, when you have subdural hematoma and retinal hemorrhages, it's abuse. That's it. I just think that we have the case of a doctor who made an accusation, and CPS is taking the word of the doctor over the family. What we've learned now is that a large number of babies in a normal vaginal delivery can get subdural hematomas. I hold our Child Protective Services doctor responsible for this false diagnosis because she did not look at the entire medical picture.
We reached out to the child abuse pediatrician, but they declined our request to comment. All right, I want to add something to this from the medical standpoint. Joining us on Polycom is former president of the American Academy of Pediatrics and child abuse pediatrician, Dr. Robert Block. Dr. Block, thank you so much for joining us and talking about this situation here. And let me be very clear, Dr. Block, you have not seen this family, and you have not seen this child. So you're talking about this in a general sense and from a hypothetical standpoint in fairness to you, correct?
That's very correct, yes.
We're talking here about essentially shaken baby syndrome, which is what was alleged in this case. The injuries that we're talking about here can occur if a baby suffers trauma to the head, correct?
Well, that's correct, Dr. Phil. It's difficult, obviously, to comment on the specific case at hand, but in general, there are several symptoms and signs that we look for when we are going through a differential diagnosis, which means what could possibly have caused these findings, and then we rule things either in or out depending on results of physical examinations and laboratory studies and x-rays and other medical procedures.
Okay, and so if you see a brain bleed in an 11-week-old, you see retinal hemorrhages in a baby of this age, these are things that would be consistent.
They can't even match the music, they can't even rap, they're just black producing. Now they wanna crack the new shit, they just wanna act, they then bath the new kids. They can't even match the music, they can't even rap, they're just black producing. They just wanna crack the new shit, they just wanna act, they then bath the new kids. Sorry big man, sorry big man, with your big life and your kick man. Sorry big man, with your big life and your...
With head trauma that would oftentimes be associated with some type of child abuse circumstance or scenario, correct?
They could be, yes.
That is not the only way that a child could have that type of injury, correct?
I mentioned the differential diagnosis. This is very critical because we look at other known causes of these signs or symptoms and try to rule those out or pay attention to the fact that they may be a cause in a particular case.
I mean, was there trauma?
If you're speaking about a specific symptom like retinal hemorrhage, the answer would be no. There are other diseases and conditions that cause retinal hemorrhages. The hemorrhages themselves don't take on the same form or number or distribution as we see when a shaking or impact injury has occurred. But we have to look at each one of the findings and separate in our minds whether this was from a recent traumatic episode or whether it could have been from another cause.
If you decide that it is from trauma, then you have to do some type of determination to look at intent or circumstance that may have caused it. And that's not a medical determination. That would go to home study, psychological, sociological, forensics, things of that nature, correct?
That's very correct. And usually this is a team approach to a case. The medical history is augmented by history from CPS, from law enforcement investigation, from interviews, as you indicated.
Now, there's been something made here, and I asked Josh that we would talk about this later. There have been some peer-reviewed journal articles out there that have been pointed to as debunking shaken baby syndrome and have been used to try to exclude under the Daubert ruling as junk science the shaken baby syndrome as an explanation for these injuries. But the truth is these peer-reviewed studies are pretty isolated and are not broadly embraced within the pediatric community. Would you agree with that?
Certainly would. You know, peer review, as you well know from your field of study, there's a difference in authentic scientific peer review and having a couple of your associates who agree with you review an article that you write in some journal. We have to be very, very careful to understand that every medical association in this country and in many other countries that is affiliated with taking care of infants and families, every one of those medical associations accepts the abusive head trauma diagnosis and the evaluation and the 2,000 articles that have been published justifying the way we think about this. This is a terrible injustice that's being done by a few folks whose motives I cannot comment on because I don't know, but they are absolutely wrong, and that's something that needs to be talked about more widely.
Okay, so you want it made very clear that shaken baby syndrome and the associated damage that can be done to the neck, to the brain, to the optical nerve, to the retina, to all of the things that we know to be associated, articles notwithstanding, that is a legitimate syndrome and is not something to be taken lightly and should not be scoffed at because a few articles say otherwise.
Yes, and thank you for saying that. Sometimes the final cause does turn out to be abusive head trauma. And one of the things that we have to ask is, in almost every one of these cases, the baby changes from well to being in trouble when alone with a caregiver.
In fairness to everyone here, I wanted to make this statement about shaken baby syndrome, but I also want to be clear, you're making no statement or rendering no opinion about Josh and Brenda's situation here. Specifically, you're just talking about this generally because you've not seen this family or this baby, so you're rendering no opinion about this particular case or circumstance, correct?
Correct, Dr. Phil. Thank you for that.
All right, Dr. Bach, thank you so much. All right, next, a little plastic 2-pound doll was all that took for a doctor to call it child abuse. Josh explains when we come back.
Dr. Phil.
You got arrested just a few nights ago.
I'm beating myself up over this.
What happened?
Beverly Hills housewife Kim Richards.
I poured a drink of vodka, and I thought, oh my God, what have I done?
Are you living a lie, telling everybody, no, I've been sober for 3 years?
The exclusive interview.
I was in the polo lounge. I locked the door to go to the bathroom.
And the police were banging on the door to get you out.
They were screaming and yelling.
Did you try to kick one of them?
Now,
you are drunk in a bar at 1:30 in the morning fighting with a cop. That is not good mothering. You need help.
Is this an intervention? I'm sorry, I can't.
that's tomorrow.
Now, Josh admitted to accidentally losing grip of his 11-week-old daughter, causing her to fall off his lap, which resulted in a 15-day hospitalization. Now, according to Brenda, Josh was given a 2-pound slippery plastic doll to demonstrate to the pediatrician exactly what happened. Brenda says it didn't go very well. Take a look.
The doctor had asked Josh to demonstrate what had happened with Naomi. So, wanting to be cooperative, he does a demonstration, and it fails. The doll actually went up in the air, and he said, no, that's not what happened. So he tries to demonstrate again, and he has to grab the doll's face. What he was trying to convey is, I was so afraid that my daughter's head was heading toward the coffee table that I reached out quickly to catch her. And then the doctor just says something unbelievable. Well, catching her in that way is abuse.
Okay, Josh, talk me through what you did do, okay? I have a doll here, and this doll weighs 11 pounds, which was about the weight of the baby at the time. Now, you had the baby in your lap on your knee, correct?
That's correct, Dr. Phil, yes.
Right knee or left knee?
It would be my left knee.
Okay, left knee. Okay, and you had been on the phone?
Yes, so what I did is I leaned Naomi back in my left hand on my knee while I talked on the phone. I went to hang the phone up and put it on the coffee table in front of me. And as I was doing that, I felt Naomi
international. Girl, what's your name? I have to know. Ain't no one else in your lane. Let's fill this car with gas and go. No hesitation, I'm on it. If that's the way that you want it, that's cool with me, so let's ride. Let's go somewhere that you lie.
Sliding forward off my knee, and her head was heading towards the coffee table. I reached out quickly to catch her before she hit the table, and I caught her by her face with my right hand.
Okay, like this?
Yep.
Okay.
Correct, and then I immediately pulled her up to my chest.
Like this?
That's right.
Okay. And you demonstrated this in the hospital. And
I tried.
Okay, but this was with a 2-pound doll, not an 11-pound doll, and the doll went flying?
My hand bounced right off the head of the doll, and the doll went flying through the air.
After the doctor saw Josh's doll demo, she said in the state of Michigan's petition, dated 3/31/14, if Mr. Burns grabbed Naomi's face in this manner, as demonstrated by the doll, this may be considered physical abuse. However, Naomi's fall, even as demonstrated by Mr. Burns, does not provide a clear mechanism for Naomi's injuries, RH and ICH, which refers to the hemorrhaging. I am concerned with regard to the amount of force Mr. Burns demonstrated upon grabbing the doll's face. She said, based on your demonstration of a 2-pound doll that slipped in the room, that how much you grabbed the doll when it slipped, that based on that, she would conclude that that was abuse.
Correct.
All right, we're going to take a break, and I strongly believe that in America, Depriving someone of their liberty, putting someone in jail, should be something that is of the highest standard. You must meet a very high standard before you deprive someone of their liberty, and whether you deprive someone of their children. And I want to examine whether or not those standards were met in this case, or whether this man and this family have been railroaded. We'll talk about that after the break.
My husband had a number of small things on his criminal record, nothing that kept him from flying as an airline pilot, but things that the prosecutor and that Child Protective Services tried to use literally 18 to 20 years later. The prosecutor even said, people don't change. He had an altercation with his sister in which he pushed her to the ground and said some horrible things. They were both teenagers. It was stupid. Shortly after we were married, my husband did get a DWI. He was disappointed with himself. For the past several years, my husband has been completely sober. My husband is not an abusive person in any way, shape, or form.
Grab another bottle of that bubbly, top shelf living. We don't owe you an apology. Grab another bottle of that bubbly, top shelf living. We don't owe you an apology.
Josh says he just wants to be reunited with his wife Brenda and his daughter Naomi. He was facing up to 10 years in prison for second-degree child abuse due to what he says was an accident. He is now serving a 12-month sentence and says he is innocent. Now, I want to, just to kind of put all of this in context, let's talk about shaken baby syndrome here. Dr. Sophie, could you join us up here? Because I would like your medical expertise in this. You're going to tell us what we're seeing.
Yes,
here.
you have a baby's head, which is 25% of his total body weight shaking around. Inside is that brain going against the walls of the cranium. It's slamming back and forth. Blood starts to leak, starts to pool up into the empty spaces between the brain and the cranium, and the blood puts pressure on the brain.
Okay.
And then eventually the retina has which is the lining of behind the eyeball, has a blood vessel that is getting pulled as well, and it starts to leak blood to the back of the eye, which is the retinal hemorrhage.
And this is the hemorrhaging that we're talking about.
Exactly.
Right here.
And when you look inside the eye from outside, you will then see these blood spots in the back of the eye.
Okay. And this is what we're talking about can happen from shaken baby syndrome, but that's not the only thing that can cause this.
Exactly.
You had a vacuum procedure.
Yes.
During your pregnancy. They made 4 attempts, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
First off, there are superficial scalp markings because they actually come into contact with the head, which we'll take a look in a minute. But there is also hematoma, right, which is associated also with shaken baby syndrome.
Absolutely.
Correct? There's intracranial hemorrhage, which we just saw.
With the blood pooling.
With the blood pooling,
right,
which is associated with shaken baby syndrome, correct?
Yep.
There's also retinal hemorrhage, which is associated with shaken baby syndrome.
Which we just saw, yes.
So you have a procedure that was used in this pregnancy that has 1, 2, 3 side effects that are also consistent with what can happen in shaken baby syndrome.
Right.
Now, this is 11 weeks later.
It may not have been healed completely.
And we can see here, irritation here. We can see the bruising here. We can see irritation and bruising in this area, and this area. So this baby clearly had been impacted by this procedure at this point. Now, look, I was not there I don't know what took place. There's a huge question mark in my mind about this. So at that point, both from CPS and just from a forensic psychology standpoint, don't you then start looking at intention, background, home, all the things to determine whether or not this person is a likely candidate to have done something like this?
Absolutely. If you don't, it's not full investigation.
The investigation stopped at the child abuse pediatrician.
Bugatti riding slow tonight, 'cause I'm loving every moment under city lights. Bugatti riding slow tonight, 'cause I'm loving every moment under city lights.
My thoughts when we come back. Closed captioning provided by
And Pure Silk Shave Cream for women.
Pure Silk.
I am appalled that you are still listed on a child abuse registry when you have been exonerated of any wrongdoing. That makes no sense to me whatsoever. I have to say, I have looked, Josh, at your background, and I know in the civil proceeding, a judge, for reasons that I don't understand, sought to read to a jury everything from traffic tickets to a fight with your sister. I've looked at your background, and I certainly do not see any conduct, behavior, or history that is gateway to the behavior that you are accused of here. There are alternative explanations for the symptoms that she has shown. No juror is an expert in obstetrics, and I certainly am not. But as I read the literature, from a layman's perspective, it seems there are at least potential alternative explanations for her symptoms, and that equals reasonable doubt. Josh, sir, I'm sorry that you're talking to me wearing an orange jumpsuit. It simply does not seem right and just to me. It just doesn't seem right to me. Josh has not seen Naomi in more than a year, but he can see video. So we wanted to show him Naomi from just a couple of days ago. So we will let you have a moment to watch this video of your daughter. I hate that you missed her first steps, and I hope that you keep up the fight. You have a passionate advocate in Elizabeth Warner. I want to thank my guest today. Elizabeth, thank you for being here. I want to thank Dr. Charles Sophie. I want to thank Dr. Block. And Josh, thank you and Brenda for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you so much.
For more information about today's show, log on to drphil.com. If you have questions regarding shaking baby syndrome, abusive head trauma, log on to don'tshake.org. Thank you so much for being here.